Hello, my name is John Teply, and today I have the great pleasure to be interviewing Trish Harding. Um, she's a fascinating artist. You can always tell kind of the things that she's representing because she seems to love the world that we see. But also, there's something about it that's quite different. You know, she activates the painting. Well, many of the paintings that I'm familiar with, she does on copper, which is fascinating because it adds kind of a middle value that's very intense and very warm that you really need to work with, and I think it's a very interesting way to work with a painting. Um, so, how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing just fine. Yeah, we're getting kind of back to business really after COVID. So I just changed
Yeah,
my mask protocols at my studio and, just starting to feel a little loosening up everywhere is really good.
yeah, we actually feel that same way in Portland. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and you are in Bellevue,
Bellingham, Washington.
Bellingham. Yes. Yeah, and so we're things are seem to be kind of going back to normal, but then we're keeping our fingers crossed because we've been there before.
Right. Everything is fluid.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me, Trish, when you're starting a work of art and you're beginning to develop the composition, what are some of your first thoughts?
Well, my first thought is that I can't paint what I don't know. I really love to do a lot of research, and I think I do my best work when I have a kind of an intimate relationship with the visual and the expressive part of painting. For example, I paint a lot of things where I feel like I've known it all of my life, like the edge of the
Ah,
English Sea. I grew up right on the beach of Lummi Island. So I had one foot in the water, one on land, and I can see the Mount Baker volcano from that place. And so I'm always kind of feeling like what I paint has to have some real intimacy for me. And that's kind of where I start. I really respond to a lot of things visually, and I have to edit a lot of it out so that I can get right to the core of what I know best so I can express it the best.
so the kinds of things that you initially connect with, are they like intangible things uh, like emotions, feelings, transcendent kinds of experiences? Or is it simpler than that, just like the love of a place?
Well, I think it's pretty simple. I'm not that complicated, but it is layered. I'm often, when I'm looking at the world around me, I'm really intensely influenced by light, and I think that's because I grew up right on the water. The light here bounces from the clouds and into the air, and it's just a little bit more bouncy than other places where it's absorbed into the ground because the water is all around us. You
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
feel that in Portland as well because you're close to water. But yeah, I'm very visual. I really react to the light around here and to the kind of the magnificence of things, the things that make me feel small.
Yeah. So and could you expand a little bit about reacting to light? What does that mean, with your brush strokes or compositionally to react with light?
Well, it has a lot to do with value. I find that of all of the contrast, value is the one that I use the most. And because I'm interested in the light, a lot of times my values are very just kind of distant, like I'll have really strong lights, really warm lights, and very, very dark darks. And the combination of those two really help to, create a mood and a drama for me. So, and then of course, the light changes so much when the sky is a light value sometimes, and then sometimes it's a darker value.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's just really a combination of those things. I do use a lot of brush strokes. I like to use a stroke and leave it at the end of a painting. And I like to use complementary strokes next to each other, not unlike the pointillist, but more of a stroke rather than a dot. That's how I, kind of show some success at depicting the light.
So you uh so value is important, but then also like complementary colors and uh working with that. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I often will try to use complements, not necessarily full chroma, but like sometimes I'll start with a neutralized green, and then I can see, like, if I use a tinted red into a pink over the top of that and juxtapose to that, it really shows the brightness of the pink, and then because of the neutral green. So I use a lot of that intensity comparison as well as the value to help to show that. I find that if I use just brights, of course, they're overwhelming, but if I use them on top of or intermittently with their complementary dulls, that is really helps to show that kind of sparkle and diamond thing reaction that happens
Yeah.
on the water.
Now, how about the brush strokes themselves? When you what are you going for when somebody looks at your work? Are the strokes raised, and do they tell their own story, or do you keep them flat? What is something that you're trying to do?
Well, in the beginning of my paintings, of course, I'm blocking in. So I use thinner paint and just kind of block things in, mostly to my darks and lights. But as the painting gets more toward a finished process or a finished place, I like to use strokes to show a direction of things. For example, if the ground is moving forward in from a vanishing point, I'll move those strokes directionally toward me as the painter. Sometimes I'll whirl them around in the sky underneath the final stroke so that I feel the movement of those clouds or the building maybe of the clouds too. So it often has to do with direction and perspective.
And the painting grounds that you use, I mean, my sense is that you're always up for an experiment, and I think one of those experiments turned out to be painting on copper, but it's also that you're searching for the right element or something in order to realize a vision that you have. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that has to do also with using copper. There is such a blinding reflection on the water sometimes in the late day when the water goes down. You almost can't look a certain direction for the brilliance of it. And I know that it's feeble to try to imitate that, but what I do like to do is be inspired by that. And I used to kind of hang around the restore and use, old junk places. And back before metal became really expensive, you could stumble on really beautiful pieces of metal. And that's when I started to kind of work with that, because I would take these big, at first it wasn't copper, it was stainless steel. I found a bunch of pans, like you would use in the, I don't know what, heating business or whatever. And they had edges on them and they were stainless steel. So I would take those out and they were quite large. And I would take them out to paint outside. The Georgia Pacific paper mill was dismantling. It took several years, but they were going out of business, dismantling. So they had this incredible little metropolis right across from my studio with these big tanks and these metal things and these industrial things. And so I would stand on the edge as all these things were being deconstructed, and I'd paint what I called the terrible beauty of this industrial, almost wasteland. And some of the paintings just turned out gorgeous, even though the subject matter.
Yeah.
And I first started using those because I would have one place I set up was there was land on the back of me, then this inlet of water, and then I was here, and then more water, and then the plant itself. And so there was all this light bouncing around. And then you had all the metal things juxtaposed to the brick, huge buildings. And that kind of thing was going on. So I was playing with this metal to kind of capture something, not necessarily to imitate, but to be influential in that.
Yeah. I remember once I was had a project of painting crayfish in water. And it reminds me of the problem you're talking about, because when you look through water, light's always bending and it's reflecting, and there's shadows where you don't expect them. And it's quite a formidable project, actually.
Yeah, you've got the light, you've got the reflection, then you have the reflection of the objects like the islands, or we have lots of islands out here. Then you have the reflection of the water, of course, but then you have also the waves that kind of fragment that reflection, like this. And then you also have the current and the tides moving the reflection in a different way. So it's not always like a mirror image, like a lake, a calm lake. You have all these elements of weather happening, so sometimes you don't know where the edge of something is.
Yeah. You just kind of have, one way to do it that is just freeze it in time in your mind and do your best.
Well, a lot of my stuff I do either from sketches from painting plein air. I do use photographs to kind of capture where the buildings are and what they look like, or, objects. But boy, I tell you, that painting in that moment and having to capture something, and sometimes you have to kind of change it right within a minute or a second later, because the light changes or the shadow changes. And sometimes I leave them all there. I remember one time I was down at Georgia Pacific, and I heard that I was painting away, and there was this big old building with a tank sitting way up high. And I heard these incredible moans and groans. And I looked around, and there were all these big caterpillar kind of machinery, and this huge cable was moaning and groaning and getting tighter, and it tightened. And as I was drawing this big building, that pulled on that cable, and part of the top of the building came down. And I'd already started drawing, And then I just left the one upright, and then I started painting the one a little bit coming down. And then it did it some more groans and moans. And I looked over, and it pulled it some more, and it fell over some more. And I was just anticipating this huge crash and dust and everything coming up. And so I drew crazy. And so I had a drawing, like a time frame, like a timed drawing.
Nice.
It finally fell. And to my disappointment, all it was this kind of dull thud and dust coming like this. But it was a great drawing. I mean, it was just a drawing of charcoal and Conte crayon on a pure pigment underpainting. So it was just kind of a quick thing. I think it took all of maybe 20 minutes.
Sounds absolutely inspired.
It was very, very cool.
So now your world of your paintings, it's a world that feels like gravity, and it feels like, that there's sun and light, but things like buildings don't always behave uh, as we normally experience buildings. Could you talk about, because there's this uh, like appreciation of the world of gravity and light and all that, but then your mind goes someplace else too, and you throw it in there. At least that's how I would explain it. Could you talk a little? Can we hear how you would explain it?
Explain the idea of buildings and things like that, you mean, or?
Well, just how they're like your buildings seem to have sometimes, not all time, but sometimes seem to be in a different world.
Mm. Yeah, when I was a child, my father was actually the accountant at Georgia Pacific. And it was before computers and stuff. So he would take me down to his little kind of like mid-century modern office right on the water at the entrance of the mill. And he would do all of his accounting on those green ledger sheets by hand and then check it on his adding machine. And then he would take me into the mill, and I was really small at the time. And I remember everything was so enormous.
Wow.
In the buildings themselves are stories and stories high before they even took them down. There's still some there that have had, several stories taken off. But I remember going into this one part of the plant where they actually rolled the toilet paper. And the toilet paper, it was a giant roll of toilet paper the size of a story building. And then they'd roll it on there, and then they would slice it, and then they would roll it into individual little rolls. And I remember everything was so colossal. It was so huge. I mean, even this giant roll of toilet paper. So I think what it kind of felt like to me was like a metropolis, this place that had uh, its own id. It just operated with these little people kind of doing things, but it was like its own thing. And I remember the buildings just being huge, 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 and all of that. And so they became more of a, like a Fritz Lang movie where
Yeah.
where you're trying to stop things, like he's trying to stop that clock, the time. And I don't know, it was just an experience that was, again, something so much bigger than I was, and to be in awe of that. So I've always been drawn to kind of industrial kind of images and try to find the beauty and the awe in them, I guess, is what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
The
those places need our love too.
Yeah. And the plant is now pretty much gone, what they're going to take down. And they've recycled, I think, like 97% of all of the materials there. And they're building a park there and everything. And they left some of the big towers and the acid ball where they used to make the paper mulch or whatever. And as a legacy to what happened there, all of it wasn't great. Some of it was. It sent people to college. It fed people. People worked.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's mercury poisoning. There's just a lot of, not good things that happened there. So I think that the legacy that's left is really great because, it tells both sides of that story.
No, that's great. So now to switch gears a little bit, how well does artwork as a tool to encourage people in certain directions? The 7th Generation Project is about being in solidarity with generations in the future, and thinking of their needs, as well as ours. Um, how does how well does art work in that regard?
Well, I think it's probably my most important thing that I do with my art. I've been, of course, marching for peace and social justice since 1969 when I got out of high school, and I'm still doing that. And I do use a lot of my work, to that end. We do projects at my studio with some of my students. One of them was artwork against the coal terminal they wanted to put out on the sound out here. It was a obscene giant coal terminal that they wanted to put in. And of course, I don't think we had a lot to do with them not doing it. It was mostly the natives. It was their sacred land, and they finally got it, to the terminal kind of squelched. They can't do it now because of the native land. But we did a big show against the coal terminal. We did a big show against coal trains coming through, as and oil tankers of the bomb, the bomb trains they call them, that come in with the explosive oil from the Bakken fields in Montana. And so we use our work quite often to say something. One of the buildings they wanted to destroy in town was called the Granary, and we did a big show called Love the Granary, and people did plein air paintings, of the granary, and we had a big show to just kind of inform the community, and I do a lot of work like that. It's kind of in a separate little box from some of my other work.
Sure.
You can't show it everywhere. You like a landscape, let's say, so you can have a very narrative landscape that isn't so provocative that it offends people, but some of my work would offend people, so I kind of keep them separate.
Sure.
So I think it's the way that I think it's powerful, the way artists can use their art, in those kinds of ways. Like for the fourth or the seventh generation is just like perfect.
Well, good. And we'll be showing at the Lincoln City Cultural Center the 12th through the 17th of July. And if those that are watching this interview, if they come down to Lincoln City Cultural Center, we could see her work. We were always struggling for the last panel of the 7th Generation Project. And finally, last year we got Peace Park. And it's
Yes, and I was actually so excited when you mentioned that, because of my work for peace all of these years, and also to be the farthest north piece.
yes.
It was perfect. So yeah, that's groovy.
Well, thank you, Trish, for talking with you. You're a fascinating artist, and it's really lovely to hear you talk about your art in your own words.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. And for everybody else, hopefully we'll see you in Lincoln City, and if not, keep checking us out at our website.
Okay.
Thank you, Trish.
Thank you. See you in Lincoln City.
Good. Bye-bye.
Bye.